Hi, I'm Kathy Daneman, and on behalf of Mystery Writers of America, welcome to the 77th Annual Edgar Award Symposium. Tonight's discussion is with the nominees for Best Fact Crime. Our moderator tonight is Duane Swierczynski, and our bookseller is Mystery Loves Company in Oxford, Maryland. You can learn more about the Edgar Awards by following us on social media using the Edgar's 2023 hashtag, or by visiting our websites, mysterywriters.org and edgarawards.com. The Edgar Awards will be live streamed on our YouTube channel on April 27th. During tonight's discussion, I will be posting links to our panelists' books in the chat. Please feel free to submit questions in the Q&A box throughout the conversation, and we'll get to them at the end of the hour. Duane Swierczynski is the two-time Edgar-nominated author of 15 novels, including The Wheelman, Severance Package, and Canary, as well as the graphic novels Breakneck and Redhead. Along with James Patterson, Duane co-created the Audible original The Guilty, starring John Lithgow and Bryce Dallas Howard. He's also written over 250 comic books, including Cable, Deadpool, The Immortal Iron Fist, Punisher, Birds of Prey, Bloodshot, Star Wars Rogue One, and The Black Hood. A native Philadelphian, Duane now lives in South Carolina with his family. Duane?
Hey, thank you, Kathy, the introduction. Actually, South California. If that's a typo, my apologies. Yeah, I'm in California, not Carolina. Lovely state. I'm just not there. Thank you so much for being here with and all the nominees. Congratulations. I was lucky enough to chair this category, and I'm not kidding. It was stiff competition. It was so many wonderful books. It was hard because trying to pick the best out of some really great books was difficult, but I'm very proud on your behalf of all of you. It's amazing. And I'm so happy to be here tonight with you to discuss hopefully your process a bit and kind of hear more about you. So let me introduce everyone to everyone's watching at home. I'll start with Kathleen Hale. Kathleen is the author of 2 adult novels and 1 essay collection. She has written for The Guardian, Vanity Fair, and Vice, among others, and is a writer and producer for Outer Banks on Netflix. She was born in Wisconsin and lives in Los Angeles, which makes us kind of homies. So across the valley or wherever you are. Erika Krouse is also here with us tonight. She's the author of Tell Me Everything, the story of a private investigation, as well as Contenders and Come Up and See Me Sometime. Tell Me Everything was a New York Times editor's choice and has been optioned by Playground Entertainment for TV adaptation. Erika's work has also appeared in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, Esquire.com, Granted.com, Plowshares, and One Story. She teaches creative writing at Regis University and Lighthouse Writers Workshop. Kathryn Miles is the author of 5 books. Her essays and articles have appeared in publications including Audubon, Best American Essays, Best American Sports Writing, the Boston Globe, the New York Times, Outside, Politico, and Time. A contributing editor at Down East Magazine, Miles also serves as scholar in residence at Maine Humanities Council and as a faculty member in several MFA programs. Welcome, Kathryn. Shahan Mufti is the chair of the Department of Journalism at the University of Richmond. My old job, I'm kidding, it's a journalist, but and a former Daily News reporter for the Christian Science Monitor. His work has been published in Harper's, Wired, New York Times Magazine, Business Week, The Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, and many others. He is the author of The Faithful Scribe, a story of Islam, Pakistan, family, and war. His second book, American Caliph, the true story of a Muslim mystic, a Hollywood epic, and the 1977 siege of Washington, D.C., won the J. Anthony Lucas Award Work in Progress Award in 2020, and was named one of the best nonfiction books of 2022 by Publishers Weekly. Last but not least is returning champion Daniel Stashower, a New York Times bestselling author and 3-time winner of the Edgar Awards from the Mystery Writers of America. Also the shortest biography, but your work says it all, Daniel. So I appreciate that. Anyway, thank you all for being here. It's a thrill. In a past life, I was a journalist, nowhere near as seasoned as you guys. I was a local journalist. And I traded up for making up stories, but I truly admire the craft and I'm fascinated by it. And I have some questions in 2 categories for you guys tonight. And some are for individuals and some are more for the crowd. Basically, I want to talk about origin stories. And I want to start with Kathleen and Slender Man. Like, what brought you into the world of Slender Man, which fascinates and creeps me out? I'm just curious where it came from and kind of what was your path earliest days?
Well, I heard about the crime in 2014 the way that everyone else did, which was online. And at the time, people were very, very obsessed with the evils of screen time and what it was doing to our bodies. So the fact that these two girls had killed in honor of an internet meme sort of fell into that discourse. And that discourse really took over coverage of the case. People were really fixated on Sunderman, really fixated on the gruesome nature of the crime. The victim was stabbed 19 times, and so her survival kind of got lost in that hysterical conversation about screen time, as did the ages of the girls who were involved. They were just 12 at the time of their crime, and Wisconsin proceeded to prosecute them as adults. So I grew up nearby where this happened, only 30 minutes away, so I was really well acquainted with the area. And I kind of just kept waiting for someone to ask the question that I had, which is like, why is my home state of Wisconsin prosecuting these kids, one of whom has a severe mental illness, as adults? And when that question, I kept waiting for someone to answer it. When they didn't, I ended up covering the case myself starting in 2018.
Wow. So how early did you start collecting like clippings, or like how soon did you start building your file? I'm presuming you have a file, notes. I just sound curious how that evolved for you early on.
Yeah, so I went to the crime scene about 3 weeks after the crime occurred, and walked that crime scene, which I'm really glad that I did, because they ended up raising the woods where it happened. Wisconsin has a history of doing that. When Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested, they just tore down the apartment building. So it's just sort of part of like the whole thing, this Midwestern practice of sort of sweeping things under the rugs. And maybe if we cut down the trees, this will never happen again, and we don't have to think about it anymore. So I
Incredible.
started thinking about it and collecting all those clippings and stuff 3 weeks afterward. And then by 2018, I had gotten access to Morgan Geyser, who's the little girl with schizophrenia who committed the crime. And I spent a really long time with her in the locked psychiatric ward where she still lives. And so I guess from start to finish, I was working on this book, since 2014.
Yeah. Incredible. Wow. And what, timing to like be there in the crime scene before they did bury it literally, or raise it. That's kind of, I didn't realize that. That's shocking. Thank you. Next question is for Erika. Erika, you have a really unique blend of memoir and true crime. I was just curious, as a writer, we all expose ourselves in small ways in our work, but you're putting yourself out there. Did you have any hesitation early on and throughout the process? I'm just curious if that was, part of your thinking.
I had nothing but hesitation the whole time, and even after, because, I'm actually a very private person. So I was like, these are things I've never told anybody ever in my entire, well, I've told some people, but like, I've had friends for 20 years and I haven't told them about my own history. And then here I am, like talking about sexual violence, in a book that anyone can pick up. So it was a big shift for me, to do it. But I figured, I'm writing about this crime and this case, and it's the first ever that my book's about the first ever sexual assault Title IX case in history, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I worked on as a private investigator, and it was a 5-year case, and it was very long. And I'm writing about all these women and all these witnesses, and I was like, well, what kind of coward do I have to be to like talk about all these really, really brave people? And then I'm just gonna pretend that it didn't happen to me. That didn't feel like I was gonna have the integrity to be able to write the book well. So I knew I had to do it, but believe me, I tried to think of every other way I could get out of it. I was like, well, what if I sort of do it?
I can imagine. Did you have any kind of role models, either in memoir or true crime or even fiction? Because being a private eye, the first person private eye narrator is it's a common trope. It's like a thing. But I was just curious if you took inspiration from any of those genres or any of those fields in writing.
There aren't any literary true crime PI memoirs that I could find. I mean, maybe there are, but I just couldn't find them. So I think I just took inspiration from the same, I just treated it like a novel, really. I was like, okay, I've written one novel. It didn't do so well, but at least I had that under my belt. So I was like, I can sort of use the things I knew there. And then I thought of other PI novels and what I liked about them and what I didn't like about them. And I thought of other also just work narratives. Because it was a lot of the books about the job of being a PI and what it involves and things you do and you have to do and things you you don't want to do. So I kind of, those were kind of the streams I took. But as far as the memoir piece, I just decided, I was like, okay, the case is going to be the plot and my history is going to be the subplot, and I was like, I know how to do that from novels, so I'll just do it that way.
Yeah. And I'm kind of jumping ahead for a question for everybody later, but I'm just curious, in your case, when did you realize, okay, this is beyond, it's your job, but when it become like, this is also a book, or this is a thing I need to record as a journalist? When was that moment? Was it early on? Was it?
No, I never thought I was going to write that book. I mean, it was never, ever in my brain. And then actually, the book came out of rejection letters. I kept submitting for 20 years to Granta, and they kept rejecting me in all genres. And then but they saw my cover letter so much, they said, I see, still no, we don't like what you sent me, but we see that you worked as a private eye. Would you like to write a piece on spec? And I said, sure. And I wrote it. And then I thought, God, I'm leaving everything out. Like, it just felt like, it felt like almost like, I mean, I told the truth in the piece, but it felt like it was a lie because I'd left out every other thing that I thought was important. So I was like, I think this is a book, but again, like, I was like, is there any way I can get out of it?
Not do this. Yeah, amazing. Wow. Thank you for that. That's great. I want to turn my attention to Kathryn. Kind of similar question, when did you first hear about these horrific murders of these young women, and what was your earliest memories of like saving clips or, following it? Just curious about how that happened for you.
Yeah, a lot of what Erika just said really resonates with me. I came at this story, which was the really brutal murder of two backpackers in Shenandoah in 1996. I came at it primarily as, a backpacker and a sexual assault survivor, and someone who really identified in a lot of ways with the victim long before I had ever even considered this as a book project. And so for me, one of the things to kind of parse out as a writer was, given my real lack of objectivity, how do I kind of own that in the process? Because this had been such a personal story for me for so long. And so that was something that was really challenging for me when I came to kind of organize the book and kind of own my own participation in it.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you said spark something, it's like you have to be really, obsessed with a certain case or into it for personal reasons. Yet journalism almost demands a distance, right? Because you have to tell a story to everybody, and it's very different from telling a friend over a meal what you're fascinated by versus like a mass audience. So that's got to be, it's interesting, the same push and pull of a personal connection, but how much do you share of that in the book?
Yeah, and I think that this really comes, it kind of pushes up against a lot of what's happening culturally right now in terms of both social science and science, right? Which is this, we would love to give the aura of objectivity for whatever we're doing, whether it's journalistic reporting, whether it's scientific inquiry or whatever. But the fact is, we all come with a lot of subjectivity and a lot of bias. One of the things I really try to interrogate in this book is this idea of confirmation bias and the way in which it hems in a lot of investigations. And I think one of the most responsible things we can do, both as writers and as people, I think, committed to looking at issues of crime and whether it's wrongful conviction or whatever else the case is just really own that bias from the start. And that was something I tried to really do with readers from the very first pages of the book.
Yeah, and very well done. Yeah, so thank you. That's great. Shahan, a question for you. Before in our little practice session, I overheard a little bit of some conversation that this is this siege in 1977 was like sandwiched between two very high profile, terrorist incidents. How did you find this earliest days? Like, when did you first hear about it, and how long was it gestating, and what were you doing the process wise? What were you doing, collecting clips or what have you?
Yeah. So just like Daniel, and I was just saying, he doesn't remember. I didn't know about this.
Yeah.
I'd never heard about it. I came to this around 2015, and I was very sideways, through a side door. It was actually the events, and there was a shooting at a magazine, Charlie Hebdo magazine in Paris in 2015. And some of you it was big news.
Oh, yeah.
And there were these two people who had just walked into an editorial meeting basically and just gunned down a lot of the staff of that magazine. It was huge news. And I was no longer, I'd worked as a journalist, as a daily news reporter. I'd worked in newsrooms. I was no longer in a newsroom. I was a professor of journalism by that time, but it really struck me, the whole thing. And then it was conversation with students, explaining to them what happened. But anyway, I mean, the whole reason behind that was what Charlie Hebdo had published on a few occasions, which was images of the Prophet Muhammad.
Yeah.
And how that, and this is a kind of a running theme and a recurring event over the past decades now, since the Satanic Verses pretty much in the 80s. But this idea that Muslims react violently, sometimes groups of Muslims can react violently, and there can be attacks and etc. And it was during, and I was kind of, inspired to just look into that. I had finished my first book, and I was looking for, I don't know. So I wrote a piece for the New Republic at that time about this very issue, about why this happens, how this happens, the mechanics of it. And it was during that time that it was in an academic study that I read this paragraph, a throwaway paragraph. Is like, just as we saw in the 1977 siege in Washington, D.C., where 12 men took over 3 buildings in downtown Washington, D.C., and took 150 hostages. And that was it. For me, I checked. I could not find that the event had ever been written about. And that was it. For me, I mean, that's the journalist in me, was just, I knew I was going to write about it because it hadn't been written about. And to me, it would have, I mean, I had no idea what I was getting into, but I knew it would be something.
Yeah, that magic moment of like, yeah, this is something. It's kind of it's mostly a rare gift. You're kind of like, if you're looking for it, you won't find it sometimes, but sometimes it pops up in your face and it's like, oh my God, I gotta do this. That's great.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Lucky.
Yeah. And last but not least, again, Daniel, what drew you to the Mad Butcher? Because I mean, I know as a true crime nerd, it's a graphic novel about it. There's been other books, but what did you see? Like, okay, this has not been told yet about Eliot Ness and the Butcher in Cleveland. I'm just curious, what was your magic moment with this book? When did you?
Oh, well, the story has been told. It's been written about it. As you mentioned, there has been great material on this story. But for me, I first heard about it when I was 8 or 9 years old. I grew up in Cleveland. I was sitting around a campfire. It was an overnight with a scouting troop, and the scoutmaster thought it would be a terrific idea to tell us all this story of a mass murder that had occurred right in the very area where we were camping, and he was very, very enthusiastic about it, and I remember we had to stop him to have him explain what the word decapitated meant. And there were many repetitions of the phrase, and the killer is still out there, and the killer was never caught. Well, I'm 8 or 9 years old. You can imagine we didn't get a lot of sleep that night. But this childhood boogeyman kind of grew into a lifelong fascination. Wow.
So even as a kid or a teenager, were you collecting stories about this, or what was your scrapbook like? I'm just curious how soon you started like doing real research on this case. There are sort of scattered references to it all around town. There's a museum in Cleveland where some of the death masks of the victims are displayed. And there were, when I was growing up, there were still people who spoke of it because it was in their active memory. This took place in the 1930s during the Great Depression. And even my own father remembered certain elements of the story. It was something that old timers in Cleveland, when I was growing up, still spoke about. And there was also this element to it, this piece that didn't quite fit, that Eliot Ness was somehow involved with it. And as a kid, I didn't understand that either, because Eliot Ness was the guy I saw on television, and he was part of Chicago. It's the Cubs, deep dish pizza, Eliot Ness. It's all Chicago. But again, I kept hearing from my parents and my grandparents' generation, no, he lived in that house over there. And I was told that his son had gone to my junior high school, and
all these pieces, but it wasn't really until I was older, and in fact, when my father was in failing health, and I saw that I was going to be spending a lot of time in Cleveland, that it became that it turned the corner from something that I was fascinated about into an obsession.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned also your camping trip as a kid. I took my kids when they were in grade school on a trip to Cleveland, and of course, the major stop I want to make was Elliot Ness's office down in Cleveland. They're like, "Who is this guy, Dad?" I'm like, "Trust me, this is cool. This is cool someday." So I understand your counselor's impulse to like tell you guys something cool, but possibly brain warping at that young age, but that's okay. Other question as far as origins, it's for everybody. So jump in as you feel free. I mean, and Erika and Kathryn kind of sort of answered this, but I'm curious, like, when did you know this was a book versus an article, an essay? Like, to me, what screams you, okay, this is book length treatment? Just curious when that moment happened for you, and how did you justify it to yourself? Like, oh yeah, I'll spend years of my life on this thing now. I'm going to build this book. Anybody have that moment? They realize, oh yeah, book.
I'll go ahead and jump in. I think for me, primarily as a journalist, I think the question is the sort of universal theme or the larger component, right? I think a lot of these stories, especially true crime stories, work really well as, say, a 3,000 or a 5,000 word magazine story. And so for me, the issue is what, we call, in terms of like journalistic speak, is the set pieces, right? So what are the larger components of the story, right? Whether it's looking at issues of, race, class, gender, sexuality, whether it's looking at, again, as I mentioned earlier, bias or, issues among sort of law enforcement officers. But what are those other threads that we can kind of braid into the story? For me, that's very often the difference between like a really compelling essay or an article versus, say, a 90,000 word book.
I'll completely agree with Kathryn there that really makes the book. Mm-hmm. But for me, it was also kind of there was a reporting moment or moments as well. I kind of I filed FOIAs for my main character, Hamas Abdul Khalis, who was born Ernest Timothy McGee in Gary, Indiana. And I filed the FOIA request. He had died in 2003, so his personal files with the FBI. Their response was like it would take years at that time, a couple of years, and very quickly I got the sense that there was like tens of thousands, perhaps, pages of files on this guy. And then I did discover there were 20. They tracked the person who led the attack on Washington in 1977. The FBI had been tracking him for 25 years before that moment almost, and had been following him across the country for a quarter of a century, and then missed the attack. And so for me, that was also kind of very telling. And my reporting, I realized that definitely there was enough material here, at least on my main character, and it turned out on several peripheral characters as well, and that there was material for a book here, which is sometimes also can be a roadblock to a book.
No, absolutely. Yeah, that's fantastic. How about any others? I mean, how did you guys know, like Kathleen, a Slender Man, when did you know this is a book? This is really something.
Well, like Shahan was saying, part of it was realizing that there were thousands of pages of court documents that had never been requested, because Wisconsin has high cost of copying, sometimes up to $5 a page if you're the first person to request something. And so they had not been requested by any journalists so far. So I knew that there was a lot of content there. And then as I started to write about it, I mean, there's the internet. I like writing about the internet. I like writing about crimes that have an impact on the digital space and vice versa. There was stuff about the mental health care system in America, which I'm interested in, as somebody who has had mental illness and who I know how that you can only really get it in the United States if you have money, which is so messed up. And then the rest of our population has to go to prison in order to get mental health care resources. Yeah. There was juvenile justice reform issues, which interested me. Wisconsin politics. I sort of have an axe to grind with Wisconsin, having grown up there, having been, shaped and deformed in ways by that culture. Female friendship, is something that I want to write about. But the two things that really sort of galvanized me to want to write a longer book about this. First of all, I was originally supposed to write about it for The Guardian, and the piece was basically about the crime from Morgan's point of view and from with the perspective of like, this is a child. And that's all. I was just acknowledging that she was a child, and The Guardian was like, we can't run this. It feels like too sympathetic to the perpetrator. And that's when I was like, oh, this is a book because she's the antagonist and the protagonist of this story, and it's a coming of age story. And she victimized Bella Leutner, and that was terrible and unforgivable. But then she was victimized herself by the justice system in Wisconsin. So that was one piece. And then the final piece was when she agreed to speak with me, and I knew that I could layer in all of this close third perspective on her, and really make it about a girl who started hallucinating at the age of 3 and kind of go from there.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like, the biggest reason to do a book, what you're saying is like just a sheer volume and the kind of the topics you're trying to cover. Your canvas needs to be that large to really do this story's justice. I can't imagine any of your books, being even a long form journalism piece. Like they're so complex and so wonderfully complex. That's kind of what books are meant to do. You lose yourself in a world. So that makes total sense.
If I can add to that,
Please.
When you're writing the book, right, you think, oh, well, this is book length. But when you're writing it, you have no idea it's going to work until you're almost done with it. You know what I mean? You're like, I don't know if you've had this experience too, Duane, but like, you're like, can I pull it off? And that uncertainty carries you however many years you're working on it. So yeah, it's book worthy, book length idea, but who knows if it's going to work, right?
That's so familiar. I mean, every single time it's like, I always feel like, is this going to work? I mean, I never know. And you're right, until the end. I'm not sure if you guys feel the same way, but it's like, it really is like, I've been working for years on a sort of, it's funny, Erika, a sort of blend of fact, crime, and memoir. And it's like, so I have so many doubts, so many hesitations. Like, I'm not even sure it's going to work. I'm not sure I will until I finally finish it and then think, oh, maybe this does work, or I'll put it away. So it is the high wire act you're walking there, you're talking about. Which actually brings me to my next category of questions. This is where I get to pick your brain and steal all your great ideas and methods, because I'm a greedy journalist. I want to hear all your secrets, and I'm sure the people watching now do too. Research techniques fascinate me. I mean, I fall down research rabbit holes, as I'm sure you all do. Like, that's kind of part of the fun, right? I'm just curious from each of you, what's the coolest or new, more novel research technique you learned while writing these books that have been nominated? Like, anything you've learned that's like, wow, okay, this works now. This is a cool trick I never knew before. This is for anybody who wants to, confess.
I have some nerdy answers to that.
Love it. Yes.
Like digital technology. I mean, the first thing that came to my mind was COVID, and how to write a book through a pandemic is a good skill to have, I guess.
Yeah.
But it was actually technology I really used in a way that I had not used in my first book, or even in a lot of my daily news report or magazine work either. There is, just the amount of material that I was saying, there was just thousands, tens of thousands of pages of FBI files, court records, like Kathleen was saying, digitizing them, OCR, like kind of recognizing text, being able to move through the ideas through keyword searches, through like the PDFs and who's talking about what. I actually ended up using quite a lot of that. And I don't know if I would have been able, I mean, I think it really helped produce a final work that's solid. And I really wanted it to be just solid. And it was so sprawling. The story was around the world, happening around the world. There were events happening in the Middle East, in Asia, in the United States, of course. And so there was a lot that I was keeping track of geographically over time. And technology helped me keep track of some of that. So I think that's one thing that was new to me in this project.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great, it is, because 10 years ago or before, there was that ability. You have to comb through, just like, you spend years, right? Combing through, looking for those things that your intuition says, oh, I should look up this thing. you're there all day. I'm just trying to look through. Okay,
I mean, it still took all day.
for all week. Yeah, you're right. It's a time saver. You're right.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and it's efficient.
Yeah. How about everybody else? Anybody have a cool technique they want to share?
Sure. So I didn't really figure this out until after I had written the book, but then I sort of took it forward onto other projects. But one thing that I did in Slender Man is, a huge theme in the book is just how much the public, and especially people in Waukesha, Wisconsin, hated these girls. Like, they really wanted them to die. They wanted them to get the death penalty, which has been outlawed in Wisconsin since the 1800s.
Right.
But people were like, they wanted them to die. Like, it wasn't enough that they were being punished to such an extreme degree. Like, they really wanted them to be executed. And so in order to sort of capture that sort of conversation that was happening about it, I went to the most hateful place that I could think of, which is the comment section on social media. So I was able to, elevate those voices in the book to give a sense of the culture and a sense of the conversations that were happening around this. And in the book, I sort of cite those as they are, which are comments under YouTube videos in real time. A very serious trial is happening and people are pointing out how the judge looks like the guy from Kentucky Fried Chicken, or whatever. So, quoting those people and, using their names as if, just as I would do if I had interviewed them, because it's all public and they obviously want to be seen and heard. But what I realized at the very end of the book is that I don't have to cite it as something that was said on YouTube. I don't have to cite it as something that was said on social media. I can just say it. This is what people were saying, or, cite somebody's personal social media, which is like an insight into their hopes and dreams, but not say that it was posted on Pinterest or not say that it was, posted on Twitter, just say it. So when I wrote about Gabby Petito, which was my project after that, I tried to implement that research strategy. And so instead of saying something like, Gabby went on Pinterest and saved pictures of dream houses and baby clothes and, wedding dresses, I would say something like, Gabby didn't always want to live in a van. One day she wanted to live in a house that was 2 stories tall and 4 bedrooms thick with like a volleyball net outside and babies running around in shirts that said happy, and she would hold them against her chest at night to keep them warm. And these were all things that were drawn from the images on her Pinterest account. So that was something that I was really excited about by the end of the book.
That's exciting because it is an insight into someone's mind you wouldn't normally get, even if you had the best revealing interview, right? That's really, I mean, we all, I don't think we all realize how much we leave of ourselves out there, for people to piece together. That's fascinating. And it's almost, using it in the book, like almost like kind of a digital Greek chorus, right? You have the reactions from, everyone. That's a great tip. I'm going to steal that one for sure because it's useful. Kathryn?
I just wanted to ask, does anyone else use Scrivener? Because I found that
I did.
This one,
because that was about it. What's the appeal of Scrivener?
It's you can work on the piece and see the whole on the side at the same time, and it's really good for organization, moving things around. It's really good for revision, and I mean, the other things that helped me were things I should have already been doing, but I didn't, like footnoting everything as I used it. I didn't used to do that, but it saved me a lot of time because inevitably you go back. And I had about 7 spreadsheets with timelines. I also spent 2 months outlining and 2 obsessive months. I'm really a lot of it, but outlining before I even started writing. And I'd never done anything like that before, but I took all the court documents, all my work documents, like all my, PI memos that I had been sending, and cut them up and put them all in the right places and sourced them. So I maybe that's something like, more fancy journalists, like I'm not a journalist, but like if I were a fancy journalist, maybe I would have been doing that all along, but that was all really new to me. It saved me years of time.
Yeah, I mean, you are a fancy journalist, by the way, in my opinion. But also, I'm curious. There's a private eye. I mean, I wonder, like Dashiell Hammett before you, did you ever bring private eye technique into the reporting? I mean, like beyond the obvious, but like I'm just, how a private eye thinks about getting information out of someone or some place, that come into play for you.
Right. Also because this happened 20 years before, right? Yeah. So I'm like trying to remember. But there was also the research at the time, which was extensive. I did some really like borderline, jailable offenses, like just trying to find things out about people,
Yeah.
and there, and we, I wasn't like a hacker, I couldn't do that kind of thing, but I did a lot of they call it pretexting, where you pretend to be someone else, or snooping in their stuff, extrapolating from this to to triangulate facts. So I think that training, or it's not like I was training it, but like that experience, like on the job training, helped me with, once I was trying to actually organize the material as well, because I think, I don't know if this is true, I'd imagine it's true for the other projects, but so much of the challenge is the organization. The writing's almost like the easiest, but that was my experience. I'd love to hear the others.
Yeah, of course. Kathryn, any tricks you want to share with everybody, or it's things you learned in the process of writing your book?
I think you're muted.
Oh, right.
Thank you. Sorry for that. Yeah.
No worries.
For me, it was sort of the opposite of technology. And for me, the challenge was kind of old school reportage, right? I think, anybody who's lived in the world of kind of crime reporting and things like that has encountered roadblock after roadblock in terms of FOIA requests, especially if you're dealing with a case that hasn't been closed for whatever reason. And so the typical things that we might do often don't work. And so for me, it was really about, given the limitations of a FOIA request, how do I go from here? And so it was really about, I think, relationship building in some really kind of old-fashioned ways, in terms of building kind of rapport and trust with sources that they would be willing to give over maybe documents that they wouldn't be otherwise. And as I think about how I would exist in that world, it's daunting and intimidating, really, to trust a writer or a reporter who shows up and says, I want to tell this story. Will you please give me this information? And I think we forget, we see it as such a transactional relationship, right? I'm going to sit down and I'm going to ask you for these materials, and I'm going to expect that you give them to them. But I think what we have to really realize is how much goes into building a relationship in which someone is willing to participate in telling a story. And I think that just really comes down to basic issues of humanity and empathy. And for me, this book was a real reminder of how important it is to build all of those sorts of things, just so that people feel comfortable sharing their stories and their information.
Yeah, I mean, I used to work for a magazine, and as an intern, I admired the writers who really had an art of embedding themselves in their subjects' lives in a way that old school way that you may not get anymore, because of it's how the quick hit of like the quick post update, do this, really living with somebody and kind of earning their trust. That's a huge skill. It's a huge task. I love that. That's wow. Yeah, it's hard to do. It's a big investment, and then the trust issues too. As you know, media reporters aren't the most beloved people, out there in the world. So it can be daunting. It's funny. I found once I used to ask questions to journalists and people would shut down. Once I said I was a novelist, a crime novelist, anybody tells you everything. It's like they open up, like everybody thinks that they shouldn't tell me. Like, really? I mean, that's the funny thing, the reporter's hat versus the, crime writer hat. And Daniel, you've got to have some tricks for us, right?
Well, I'm really struck by what everybody's saying, and what Kathryn's saying about the reporter's engagement really strikes a chord. Shahan was talking about things being digitized, and Kathleen's talking about user comments and things like that, which I think shows what a moving target, what a fast changing age we're living in. But I was struck by the thought, while everybody was sharing these techniques. My previous book was set in 1861, and everything was digitized for 1861 in a way that it wasn't this time.
Yeah.
For stories set in the 1930s. So it's really strange. How I'm always struck by what's there, digitized, and what isn't. So with a lot of the work on this book, I found myself on those old hand cranked microfilm machines that you remember from junior high school. And strange to say, that really suited my purpose, because it was incredibly time consuming and, hard on the eyes and all of that. And it took a long time turning that crank, trying not to miss trying not to miss something, but I also had this wonderful, wonderful sense of the reporters who were working on the story, because you got to know the reporters, even though they were all writing almost 100 years ago. And their voices, for me, became an incredibly vital part of the story and helped me find a way in a way that I hadn't expected, because you very quickly learned which voices you could rely on to get the snappy quote, and who was good on the landscape details and all that kind of thing. And it is funny how I feel like I was developing the relationship that Kathryn was talking about with reporters who worked in in 1934, 1935. They just it got to the point where I felt that I could have been sitting at a bar with these guys, and it was really fun.
Wow. Did you also feel like looking at those old pages, also feel like the context gave you clues, like what was life like? What's advertised? What's like all the what was life in everyday life? That must have impacted you as well, just living in those years, I'm guessing.
Oh, for me,
yeah, for you, yeah. I mean, it must have been like
100%. I mean, Kathleen was talking about her relationship with Wisconsin. I mean, for me, it's kind of the same thing with Cleveland. I grew up in an era when Cleveland was the mistake on the lake. Our river caught fire. Mistakes were made, but I've always had this enduring hometown pride, and that was part of it too. I mean, I was going through a paper from the 1930s, and sure enough, the river caught fire again. Or I should say, previously, there's a whole story about the river caught fire. But what I was struck by was in the 1930s, as opposed to the 1960s and 70s when I was growing up, the city was kind of, these things happen. We're city on the move. River caught fire. We put it out. It's okay. Nothing to see here. Move along. And things like that helped me to get a sense of the flavor of the time, and became a part of the story.
Yeah, that's wonderful. You mentioned all the time periods you guys are operating in. Brings me to my next question was the opposite of great techniques is like surprising roadblocks. Like, I mean, to me, I'm fascinated by how, for instance, Kathleen, you lucked upon the crime scene. It was fresh enough you can actually walk it. Daniel, not so much. I mean, you can walk it, but it's like you're so far removed. It's different time. And Shahan, there's like, this happened like when you were a kid. I'm guessing, or even before you were a kid. So it's like you don't have that firsthand tangible thing. Erika, you were there, so it's like that's not the problem. But it's also any roadblocks as far as time for you guys, the flow of time as far as researching your projects. And how did you overcome them? Any setbacks you had, or challenges along those lines, and how did you get around them?
Well, my project is, I was tracking the life of my main character basically, but it really dwells on the 60s and 70s. I mean, it's actually a really sweet time period to be reporting on in 2020s, or the second decade of the 2020s, because there was a lot of archival record. There was a lot of all the newspaper coverage digitized, this accessible, but there were also a lot of people around from that time and who had memory of the events and who had participated in the event. So this was really kind of a sweet spot for me, this book, and the time period I was covering, because there was the riches of both. There were people around, so I was able to conduct interviews, with a lot of people, and then I had this really rich archival record as well. One thing that was kind of happening was, the pandemic was limiting, a lot of people, to be honest. I mean, a lot of people that I was speaking to and interviewing and trying to track down were in their 80s, 90s, some of them. And I was, it's sad, but it's true that, there was a lot of people who I called them and they're like, oh, he passed away or she passed away last year. And it was very sad and alarming was after COVID hit, like it started happening and I saw it happen. A lot of people in their, much older people in their 90s, especially, or dying at that time. And so that was, I mean, I don't know if there was any way to overcome any of that, but I knew I had to move fast. Was the only thing, is that, you know, this is kind of the whole event, the memory of the human memory of the event that I was trying to capture was getting lost in real, like I could feel it slipping away. Is that the lived experience of this event, especially of the hostage taking, but a lot of the organized crime syndicates that I was writing about through the 60s and 70s, they were, you know, the people were, you know, it was going. And so that to me was, you know, while it was really rich to report this story and research this story, it was also kind of, I was panicking.
Yeah, I mean, did you do a lot over Zoom as you could, or I imagine it was hard to your subjects and hard to, like, you know, get in person with your subjects?
It was really interesting. I mean, a lot of the hostages, there was a lot of hostages involved in the events in 1977, 150, close to them. A lot of them didn't want to speak to me. And I was very careful about not pushing or working those sources, because they had, you know, they were traumatized. And if 40 years later they were not willing to speak, they probably had good reason to not speak. But it's interesting, and the switch over to Zoom happened, because it did happen, and maybe for other people it did as well. But the dynamic changed. People were kind of maybe in the comfort of their living room or in their office space, bedroom. I felt like people were just kind of like willing to talk a little bit more. I don't know what other people's experience was, but generally I felt that Zoom was not a bad thing for me to talk to both victims of crime, but also some of the people who had committed these crimes. So you know, it was interesting. That switch was interesting and fruitful. I think it was actually worked well.
Yeah, in some ways, Zoom made things easier and more relaxed. You're right. Unless people open up, well, I have time now. Sure, I'll talk to you. Whereas ordinarily busy with, you know, life. I should remind everybody watching at home, we are taking questions. So any questions you have, please submit them in comments, and we can hopefully have our panelists answer them. So don't be shy, ask questions. But on a similar note, you know, about the challenges to either the time of what you're covering or otherwise, any challenges you kind of came across, and how did you get around that challenge? For anybody else?
Well, other than Morgan Geyser and her family and her legal team and, you know, experts on some of the subjects that I was writing about, you know, history, politics, whatever, nobody would speak to me. No one. Not the Waukesha Police Department, not the judge, not the co-conspirator, not her family, not the victim, not her family. And so I had to find a way to humanize those people with what I could find, and try to make the victim and the co-conspirators' character arcs as emotional and redemptive as I could without speaking to them. So I got lucky a couple of things, like, you know, tiny details, like the victim released an album doing a cover of Taylor Swift songs using only a kazoo. So like little things like that, I was able to find and sort of piece them together to create, give a deeper sense of what their personalities were, even though I had never spoken to them directly.
And how, I mean, I guess it was, you know, did you have any techniques in like do you reapproach subjects over and over again, or did you give them a respectful, like, what was your process? Like an email, a call?
I would like write to them once a year for many years. And, you know, I didn't write directly to the victim or the co-conspirator until after they turned 18, but then I did one more sort of Hail Mary pass and just tried to be really respectful and communicate with them through their representatives. But yeah, I mean, I also got lucky because there were so many court documents and so many interviews and, you know, doctors' reports and police reports and things like that. So I was able to sort of piece those together. But that was definitely a challenge.
So hard. Any other challenges that we haven't brought up yet that you guys encountered?
My book was actually shut down for 7 months because I got legally bullied by some lawyers, and because everyone I wrote about was alive. And by the way, Kathleen, at some point I want to teach you a trick to get people to talk to you. I have a little TI trick I can tell you.
See, that's why we're here.
But so what ended up happening is some people came after me and they're like, you can't write this, you have no right to write this, and in fact we own your story. It became this big mess of lawyers and harassment and threats, and the book got shelved, and it was already done. It was already done and edited, and it was kind of a nightmare. And it was during COVID, and we were broke. So I was like, I don't know how this is gonna go. But then it finally got worked out, and I had an attorney who was, basically like, this is baseless, and you can't do this to her. So but it took 7 months. There were 7 months where I'd written the book, it was edited, we were about halfway through three-quarters of the way through the legal review even, and suddenly my career was over, because I was like, I'm not going to come back from this, like, if this book gets killed, no one's going to take a chance on me again. So that was a big obstacle, and it was because I was writing about something that was not, if I were writing Daniel's book, I think I would have been safe, but
yeah,
I was writing this book that was still fresh in people's memories, and people had feelings about it. So
of course,
yeah,
it's a very invasive thing. I mean, all of us, I think, as writers, are empathetic. We're people too, but it gets in the way of the truth of the story you want to tell sometimes, and it's hard to keep the faith sometimes. I never felt sleazy. I always felt like I don't want to bother people, which of course makes me a lousy journalist, I think. But you don't want to bother people, but then you have to be persistent. Like you had Kathleen writing every year patiently, hoping that the letter will land the right time. They'll open up their hearts to you and talk to you. Okay, cool. Now's the time. Erika, how did you keep your faith those 7 months? How did you what were you thinking? How did you keep yourself sane?
Oh, I didn't.
Okay.
You're making a very big assumption. I actually developed heart problems.
I'm sorry. Oh.
Yeah, it was a big deal to me, because I cared so much about the book, especially by that point. And plus, we take these, we really risk our lives for these books. We're risking our time, we're risking our, a chunk of our life. And then if it's not gonna work out, or if we're gonna be like basically chased out of town on a donkey, then we're, it's a big challenge. So and since I'm usually a fiction writer, it was a new challenge for me. I think a more seasoned journalist, more used to writing controversy, would have been able to handle it way better than my failed attempts.
No, but you prevailed. That's the important. You prevailed and produced this, wonderful book. So that's a lesson to us all. I think we're coming to a close-ish, but anything that you guys and panelists want to bring up that I didn't ask you, because, I can't ask everything. I can sit for hours, talk to you all. I'm just curious, any of you guys want to talk about that I, missed for the purposes of our discussion? No? Okay, it's cool, because we have also, our audience is shy too, because we don't have any questions, but I'm sure they're burning with questions, but they're probably too shy to ask, because they're afraid Erika will investigate them, because she's a private eye. And I think they're terrified. Well, hey, thank you so much. I think we have some housekeeping now. I think I've been told that we need to read something to you guys. In this, join us this Saturday, April 8th at 1 p.m. for a conversation with the nominees for Best Critical Biographical, which is not as cool as Best Fact Crime, but that's okay. They're also cool. I love you guys too. You can learn more about the Edgar Awards by following us on social media using the hashtag Edgars 2023, or by visiting the website mysterywriters.org and edgarawards.com. I feel like a cheesy announcer on a TV show, which I suppose I am right now. Let me just say again, thank you so much, all of you, for your wonderful work and for sharing your time with us today. I learned a lot, and I'm going to steal a lot of your techniques. So thank you for that. I owe you a beer or something in real life. And best of luck. Congratulations. Edgar Week is exciting. I wish you all the best of luck, and so thrilled for you. Take care.
Thank you, Duane.
Thank you.
Duane, this has been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Take care.